Hi everyone, this is Doug Good again. We will begin here. We will begin here in just a few moments. Thank you. Hi everyone. For our first speaker for today, I would like to invite Heather Elliott Nestler, who is the Health Risk Advisor for Peel and Holland, to the main stage. Heather, I'm going to add you and remove myself right now.
Well, good morning, everyone. We'll get started. It's a privilege and an honor to be able to welcome you this morning. I was just thinking about last year whenever we were getting started, bringing in all of our stuff to set up there in the lobby, and it was so hot. And then today, your view may not look exactly like this, but I do hope that you have a cup of coffee or some form of caffeine that you can enjoy as we get started. We will miss seeing your smiling faces. This is an event that we look forward to each year because so many great HR professionals are in one place, and we learn from you and enjoy getting to work with you in the role that we have with employee benefits. So I do want to just say this is a funny image of what a hero we really think that you are and how much we appreciate what you do. And we know that your employees do as well. This year has been especially challenging. So many things, as if all of the acronyms that you normally deal with, like FMLA, ADA, and all of those others, weren't enough. Being able to add the CARES Act and FFCRA, we believe that you can't spell hero without HR, and we really want you to know how much we admire and appreciate your dedication and professionalism, the resilience that you've shown this year, and being able to be creative and rapid changes, and being able to just come up with a lot of creative ways to help your employees and to do your job. So we think you're a superstar. We just want to tell you that and hope that we can assist you in taking care of your employees. You are the crucial piece to the puzzle. We recognize that this is a very busy time of year, and you are taking time out of that to better yourselves and excel in your profession. And we just want to support you in that in any way that we can. We do offer a couple of other resources for you, so please don't forget, check on our website for the Peel and Holland Next Step series. We do a leadership series monthly right now for Lunch and Learns for that. We invite you to attend the SHRM chapter meetings and support the sponsors that have made this event virtual, and it's going to be a great one. So I'm going to leave you with a little bit of humor. Just, I don't know if we get a sixth sense of humor if we work in benefits in HR, but I thought it was kind of funny. So have a great day and enjoy your event.
Thank you, Heather. Next up on the main stage, I'd like to introduce Kevin O'Neill. Kevin is the Vice President of Workforce and Economic Development from West Kentucky Community and Technical College. Kevin, welcome to the main stage.
Good morning, everyone. A virtual meeting, I guess we're all used to that nowadays, so it's nothing new for most of us, but I do welcome you all this morning. I am Kevin O'Neill, the Vice President of Regional Workforce Training and Economic Development here at West Kentucky Community and Technical College. My department, Workforce Solutions, is the business and industry training department here at West Kentucky. We like to think that we are your solution to your workforce needs. We design and deliver customized training for business and industry to help maximize your productivity and efficiency. We can come alongside a new company early on, and we do that often. We work closely with the Workforce Investment Board, and we can help to provide applicant assessments and anything on the part of staffing of operation, onboarding training for new hires. We can do that as well. And then for the current companies in place for your incumbent workers, we can provide any training that you would be needing. Seems of late, the big thing that we're seeing a lot of interest in, and that's in leadership, communication, conflict, team building, those sorts of things, which is very important, as you well know. And we can go down with specific trainings even for Microsoft Suite, Excel, those sorts of operations, OSHA. We do a lot of training for some businesses for welding and then other specific sorts of training. So it really, I would say that if you would just, reach out to us, or we can work with you, kind of do a needs assessment, find out what, I know most times we would have a specific training need, and then we can work with you for other things that you might have coming up. We have something unique within the college system, the KCTCS system, that's called KCTCS Trains. Now, that's training funds that will offset the cost of training. It can be as much as 75% of your cost, then there's a 10% administrative fee, or 50% of your cost. So in either case, it's a great savings. And the difference being, if we have not worked with that company in 3 years, then qualify for that 75, 25, 10. So it's 25% plus the 10%. So basically, you're going to be paying 35% of the cost of training. So look at it like 35 cents on the dollar. So anybody who would really want to train, would save you money like that. So Mary has got brochures, a couple of flyers, electronic, that she can send out to you. That if we had been in person, actually, we would have those for you to hand out. And lastly, about the department, we also in the department have the assessment center. So any assessments that are done on the academic side, or professionals that have got to renew certificates or licenses in some form or fashion, the Department of Insurance, real estate, electrical, there's a lot of medical certifications, all of that go through our assessment center. And we also have community education. I always like to say those are the non-credit self-enrichment kind of offerings. The a la carte cooking classes to Zumba. So I like to say we go from A to Z with offerings. So we do yoga, sign language, photography, but right now we're not doing any of those, actually, because of our friend COVID. We also have, many of you have already used the spaces here in the Emerging Technology Center for conferences and meetings. So we also like to be able to provide that for you. We have on-campus catering that would help to provide any refreshments or food needs that you might have. So post-COVID, maybe we can get back to what the real normal is and be able to do some things for you. So those brochures, the flyer that Marianne has, there's the contact information for me and my two liaisons, Denise Everett and Mike Carter. Mike primarily works in the marine side of things, which we have, as you all know, presence here in Paducah. So enough about us. Let's get on with the program. The first presentation today is from a team from Neelan College, and they're going to speak to you on the 2020 Western Kentucky Employees Benefits Benchmarking Survey. And the two gentlemen that's going to be presenting today, I'll give you a brief bio on each one of them. It's Kelly Harding and DJ Story. Kelly works with employers to design and implement effective benefit programs. He's got a strong focus on public entity employers, working statewide with groups from 2 to 250 employees. He co-manages the Kentucky Association of Counties, or KACO, like we often call it, health plan. This association health plan works with over 150 public entity employer groups serving more than 5,000 employees. Kelly joined Peel & Holland in 2016 when his agency, Harding Benefits Consulting, merged with Peel & Holland. Kelly received a bachelor's degree in education from the University of Kentucky in 1985. Since that time, he's worked with national firms in sales management, and sales training with a focus on consultative approach to client solutions. He guides his clients through a strategic planning process, creating personalized strategies in managing insurance plans, risk planning, employee benefit plan development, human resources, plan compliance, and wellness programs. Kelly has a healthcare consulting license and has earned certification from the American College of Financial Professionals in Healthcare Reform Studies. DJ Story, an employee benefits risk advisor, works with employers to design and implement effective benefit programs. He has a strong focus on large employers working typically with groups of 100 plus employees. DJ joined Peel & Holland in 2015 after working in sales management in AT&T and for an insurance carrier. He received a bachelor's degree from Murray State University. DJ is the founder of Peel & Holland's Employee Benefits Benchmarking Survey, leading this project to provide employers with relevant data to guide their employee benefits decision. He is a frequent presenter at regional and national industry events and is known as a respected innovator in his field. Join me in doing a virtual welcome to Kelly and DJ.
Man, we sound important, Kelly.
That's a little scary, actually. After he wrote that. Thanks, Kevin. We appreciate the introduction and the information that you provided. We're excited to be here today and to present. A couple of housekeeping items before we jump in. Over on the left, there'll be an area for chat. We want this to be as conversational as it can be in this environment, right, DJ?
Yes.
And so ask your questions over on the left under the chat, and we'll just keep our eye on it and try to answer the questions along the way. And certainly at the end, be happy to as well. Also, we're going to make this very conversational between DJ and I. One of the things that it's really tough to do when you're on a virtual or any conference, but virtual even more, is when I'm going to show my age, DJ. I'm going to show my age right now, buddy. The old Charlie Brown teacher, wah, 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 wah. We're going to try not to be that way. We're going to try to keep this interesting and moving for you as best we can. I mean, it is insurance. The material is what it is, but we'll try to keep it. We'll try to keep it light, and we may even try to tell a joke or two. And I'm pretty sure they will not be funny, but we'll try.
We'll do our best. And if anyone feels like it's getting Charlie Brown teacher-esque, you can just write Charlie Brown in the chat, and we'll just move on to something else. All right.
Hey, so, I like that, DJ. Very good. Very good. I like that.
Always accountable. Well, thanks again for joining us. I'm happy to be here. Kelly and I are happy to be here to talk through our benchmarking survey for this year. We don't, again, as Kelly mentioned, we don't want this to be boring. We'd like to talk about some of the innovation that's happening in the industry and look forward to 2021. Aren't we all ready for 2021? I think we're almost 2 months out, getting out of 2020. So let's look forward to 2021 and what we can do in the future. So we've got a few slides to go through and talk about what we can see on the horizon.
Yep.
So for those of you who haven't participated, and I was looking at the attendees list, we got quite a few folks that have actually been in the survey this year or in the past, which appreciate your participation. Let me give you a little background on why we did this. Back in 2016, we saw an opportunity that a lot of employers in our region in Western Kentucky really, and Central Kentucky really weren't getting local data. They were getting information maybe about some things in their industry, how they could be competitive with their employee benefits packages, but they really weren't getting information from the local region and the employers they're competing with. Maybe they got something from national statistics, but it was very limited. And what we sought to do is we said, well, if you're in Western Kentucky, you probably want to be, right? If you're here, you're not aiming to go to a major metropolitan area. What we are doing here is we're trying to attract and retain folks that want to be in our region. And so we wanted to gather the data of the employers around us and around you so that you could be better suited to attract and retain the best and brightest talent.
So we wanted to make sure that this presentation, certainly it looks backwards, of course. When you look at any kind of a benchmarking survey, it looks backwards. However, we want to make this a little more forward-looking. What are we seeing coming as trends, as opposed to what we historically have seen? So as we go through today, you're gonna hear a lot more about what we think is coming in the future based on the data, rather than always just saying, here's what historically has happened. We think that's important to always be looking forward to 2021. And I've already seen a couple of posts in the chat that says, come on, 2021, we're ready for you. It has definitely been an interesting year and not over yet.
So let's start out. We are going to focus on some local trends, but we also want to see what's happening out there in those national trends. Because unfortunately, sometimes it takes a while to get down to us here in Western Kentucky. So we like to see what's happening in the major metro areas, so we can maybe try to pull that down faster for you and your employees. One of the things that we noticed is benefits packages are becoming more personalized. The days of just having a health and dental plan and vision plan, and you don't really have to worry about much else. That's gone away. There's more fringe benefits. There's more things that are customized to your workforce. And what that means is that you can't just be complacent and just offer the run-of-the-mill benefits plan and feel like you're doing something that's above and beyond what your peers are doing.
I'd add to that we get when renewal comes around, and everybody here can identify this. Renewals come around, and the one thing we focus on is what? Health insurance. And of course we do, because that's where the money's spent. That's a big call center for everybody that's on this webinar. But don't get lost just in that. We certainly have to look at that, because that's a critical part. But we tend to forget about all the other benefits that they kind of get lost in the conversation. I would encourage you to, maybe prior to when the health renewal hits, to have conversations with your advisor about the other, what we will call ancillary benefits in the business, the vision, the dental, the voluntary, the things we think of maybe as Aflac or Colonial type products, because those are important in putting the pieces of the puzzle together for your employee, allowing them to meet their needs based upon their particular situation. So look beyond that health insurance and don't get caught in that trap, because it can be very easily done just because of the call center that it represents.
Well, and this is more than just insurance type programs, right? This could be things you've looked at, like a wellness program where you're trying to drive additional engagement for your people, or different things. You know your workforce better than anyone. What are the things that are going to be impactful to them? And then what I would like to encourage folks to do is take credit for that, right? If you make sure that you have snacks in the break room, healthy snacks in the break room, and that's something that you just have done for a long time, well, then, maybe we need to take credit for that. If you've been really on the forefront, and we'll talk about this in a minute, as far as remote work, maybe we need to talk about how that's part of your overall benefits package now, and
Right.
and make sure that you're taking credit for the great things you're doing.
Yep. Good point, DJ.
So another point for national trends is that shifting costs to employees has reached its limit. I don't know if anybody has felt that way, but what most plans have done, what the industry has pushed folks to do is whenever we have those unfavorable healthcare renewals, what happens? Well, you got a few options, right? You can absorb them in your organization, or you can move costs to your employees either by adjusting the plans, by making it a higher deductible health plan, or you have to increase the premiums. And maybe you're doing a mixture of all three, right? Most people are. But at some point, that's got to break, right? At some point, we can't have $10,000 single deductibles for people. It's just not sustainable, and you're obviously not competitive. So in the industry, the high deductible health plans came along. They were a great thing when they first started, and a lot of folks still have very successful HSA style plans, but it's not for everybody. And if you haven't been able to sustain that high deductible without increasing it on a year or every couple of year basis, then the employees are starting to feel the pressure whenever they have to go and go to the doctor or have a healthcare event.
So, we moved to the high deductible health plan several years ago. And if you remember back, the conversation was, if we move to high deductible, we'll give employees tools where they can make better decisions, better healthcare purchasing decisions. One of the issues, we didn't see a lot of tools that really help the employees take a better look at where they're spending their dollars. It really just kind of shifted the cost over. We would think that would translate over in better decisions, but it doesn't always do that. In fact, at times it can actually have a reverse effect. If my deductible is really large and it's a high deductible health plan, I may avoid getting some things done that I really need done early, which can result in a much larger claim down the road. So it can actually be counterproductive. So when you're looking at your plan design, certainly you have to, we get it. You have an increase, you got to figure out how we're going to deal with this increase, but don't get caught in the trap of just shifting over additional responsibility to the employee, because it can actually, in a couple, 3 years, have a reverse effect on your rates. What we're seeing more in the industry now are tools to help the employee make better decisions, actually true cost containment tools, and being a little more transparent than I've ever seen in my 20 plus years in the business. So be looking for transparency, be looking for ways you can educate your employees to help them make good decisions, and also be focused on how you can get those employees in and getting health issues dealt with early. Yes, there's a cost to that, but it's a smaller cost than waiting 2 years down the road when we have a large inpatient expense that will occur.
Yeah. And I mean, you got to ask yourself too, like, it might alleviate a cost in the short term, but is it going to help us in the long term? And that's what we would encourage folks to look at, is how can we get this under control? How can we get our costs under control in a long-term strategy?
Strategy is 3 to 5 years, not next year.
Right. So this is one that was new for some of us, and around March of this year. Was flexible work environments became a necessity, right? For everyone that was a non-essential business, you had to figure out how to work remote. Some of us had things already set up, and we were, it was a minor transition. Some of it was a lot more heavy lifting of what do we do and how do we do it. But there's no doubt that's become a necessity in the times of COVID.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We got forced into this. I think we were seeing more of this in the last couple of years anyway, but 2020 certainly forced us into that. I know that Peel and Holland, after we went completely virtual for 2 or 3 months, we actually noticed that we didn't have any drop in productivity. In fact, we actually, in some places, maybe even had an increase in productivity, which led us to revamp our view of working from home. And we've actually now, for certain employees, have opened it up for up to 3 days per week working from home, with there's always got to be certain guardrails put on that, but absolutely, we've now changed the way we approach it. And the employees see this as a huge benefit, being able to work from home, and especially, again, where we are in today's environment.
And I'm sure everyone has done this at this point, but my encouragement is make sure you have a plan. Make sure you have a strategy. It might not mean for your business that you have people on the line or you have people that are front facing that you don't have an option to have a flexible work environment, but make sure that you have an intentional plan for those that can and those that can't, and what that policy would look like. Because I feel like the next, batch of employees, that is going to be a question that they're going to be asking is, what are my options in regards to remote work? What are my options if I need to, be at home with a child? Is there opportunity to remote in? And knowing those answers and knowing you have a policy is going to make sure that you are on the front edge of the workplaces.
Yep.
So this is one that's also been a increase in claims, increase in need when it comes to this year. Mental health and well-being benefits have expanded. If nothing else, we've just seen the claims come in that folks have, needed to have some mental health options available. We encourage that you make sure that you make your employees aware. Maybe you have an EAP program where someone can get some assistance on their own. Maybe you have a wellness program or well-being program that focuses on some mental health aspects and can help with stress and anxiety, even depression during this time. And with the winter months coming, we don't see that's going to alleviate anytime soon. I think this is the time for education if you have those benefits in place, and make sure people know where they can access them. But it's also the time, if you don't have it, to maybe you need to look at it and expand what your offerings are to help folks, because people are struggling. We know that, and we definitely want to make sure to find a way to help them.
DJ, I'd add on that is that if you have an EAP program or a wellness program or well-being program that has this portion of it, one of the things that I've noticed is over my years is that we offer these programs, but people are afraid to take advantage of it. Now, why are they afraid to take advantage of it? They're afraid if they make that phone call that these reports are going to come back in to HR. All of a sudden now, if I call and I say I'm struggling with me or my spouse or whatever, whatever my particular struggle might be, now is that going to be reported back to HR? So now all of a sudden everybody knows my problems.
Yeah.
And I think your challenge is not just to offer these types of programs, but to make sure they understand that it's completely 100% confidential. Whatever they call, whenever they talk about, we don't get reports back. Mm-hmm. The most I've seen we get back is we had 3 calls in the month, but it's never detailed. Now we know that, but we've got to really make sure our employees know that. The second thing that I usually do, especially if I'm in an employee meeting, when we go over these benefits, there's something I'll tell them that seems to resonate. When you're in the middle of an issue, when you're there in the middle of it, sometimes you don't see clearly, and you'll forget about the program that's there, right? I'm in a crisis. I'm trying to deal with it. I'm not sure whether to turn left, turn right, or go straight, and I'm not thinking clearly about my resources. So one of the things I encourage is coworkers. If you're going, if you see a coworker that's struggling, remind them, and you want to help remind them about the resources. I always say, if you see a coworker, they're struggling, you're not sure what to do, you feel like you should help, but you don't want to get in their business, just remind them, hey, you've got these great resources. There's no cost to it, and it's completely confidential. So, it can come from you, but it also can come from the coworkers. I would encourage that as well.
Yep. We've even seen ones that are focused more on just overall training for your employees, something like a substance abuse training that everyone does and gets a certification, so to help remove the stigma that it's not just you have to go out there if you have a problem, but try to get everyone involved. But it's definitely an issue right now. So make sure that people are aware of the resources that are available. Telehealth. Kelly, you want to talk about telehealth?
Yeah, boy, this one has, we've had telehealth for a number of years, but 2020, it has really become kind of the rising star because you don't want to be out. We don't want to be in the doctor's office. So telehealth simply is where you pick up the phone, you talk to a physician, and in most cases, they can actually diagnose and send a prescription to your local pharmacy. We've seen this really take off over the last 12 months, 18 to 12 months. It's something that if you don't have it, you should consider. And make sure that your employees fully understand what it is and how it works. It's one of those things to make the offer. It's another thing to make sure they know how to make that connection and use it properly. Sometimes it can be a copay involved, but in many cases, what we're seeing is that the employer will purchase that as on a capitated fee, and there's no cost to the employee. So it's great for the employee. It's a fantastic add-on benefit that's really not that expensive. It really is very, very inexpensive. The employees love it once they use it. And then here's something, depending on the provider that you choose, a lot of the providers will extend the coverage beyond just the employee. Let me give you an example. If you may offer this to all the employees that have health insurance with you, but if the employee takes employee only, typically none of the benefits extend beyond. But there are not quite a number of the providers that will say, if you take employee only coverage, we'll extend the telehealth all the way to the family members, even if they're not covered under the health plan, and no additional cost. So it's a great benefit for the employee. It can be a benefit that extends beyond the employee into the family members at no additional cost to you. And it also allows you to bring a new and innovative and needed resource to your employee base.
Yeah.
DJ?
No, I think there's nothing else to add on that. I'd say the other thing similar to EAP is the utilization. Folks have had telehealth. It's been baked into carrier offerings for a while now. Anthem is the most prevalent provider in the area, and they have a option called Live Health Online. And even ones where we've had multiple education sessions with employees, the utilization is very low. So again, I encourage you, even if you just have that baked in carrier option that's out there, make sure to educate the employees. Let them know it's there. Let them know what it takes to get signed up, and encourage folks, as Kelly mentioned on the EAP, but encourage folks to let people know if you see that they're having to set up a time to go to an urgent care. Well, have you checked in with telehealth, right? Have you signed up? Have you gone ahead and done the login? Because if you already logged in and you've already got your account set up, it makes it that much easier. And once you've used it, a couple times, you'll say, well, if it's run of the mill stuff, then I'm just going to do this because it's a heck of a lot faster and easier for me. And I've used it with my kids as well, than loading them up and trying to take them to the doctor's office just to check and see if they check something out. So it's a lot more convenient. Definitely take advantage of it. As we talked about some of those trends, were there any questions in the chat? Anybody have any feedback? Just go ahead and throw something out there if you do. We'll kind of keep moving on, but I'll happy to circle back around. Like Kelly mentioned earlier, we'd like to make this interactive other than us just womping on. All right, so top priorities for this next year. We did some in the survey a measure of the top priorities for folks, and people could elect multiple options. The options that continually came up, and they have honestly in the last few years that we've done this survey, have been we want to control your benefits costs. 76% of employers are saying we need to get our hands on the cost of our benefits. 62%. Yeah, no surprise there. 62% want overall employee engagement. That's just engaged in the culture of the workplace. People focused on the same mission. And then 54% wanted it, employee education benefits programs wanted to increase that employee education because we know this. We talked through, this is open enrollment season. We talked through this and people hear something that you've said 75 times, and they'll hear it and they'll say that was the first time you ever told me. So there's definitely an opportunity to help with education there as well. And so it's about tools, it's about resources in all of these areas. And I firmly believe they all lead up to the same, the top priority of controlling your costs. If you can educate your people, you can give them the tools to be successful. If they're engaged with your workforce, so they want to do the right things for you and the company and their employees around them, then your benefits costs are going to stay more in control than if the other was true. So,
and I would add to that, DJ, that I think today employees are looking more and more at the benefits than they ever have, because they can't replace them on the open market like they maybe could have in the years past. So, years ago, people would look just at the salary and all benefits are on the side. I think I'm finding more and more that employees are looking at the benefits and the cost of that more than ever. And also, you're spending a lot of money. Come on, employers, you're spending a lot of money on this. By getting them engaged and getting them educated, you get more value out of the money that you spend. So it's good to see that we see those bottom two rising to the top priorities, because engagement and education on your benefits is huge in getting the value of what you're spending out of the money.
100%. 100%. Got to get it to load. So here's some other things that we're seeing, local trends. We're seeing it locally. We're seeing it nationally as well. For those employers that are trying to think, okay, what's next? What's on the horizon? I'm talking specifically to folks that are looking at more self-funded strategies, things of that nature. They're trying to really kind of push the envelope on ways to save their costs and maybe drive some additional benefits. Here's some things that we're starting to see in that industry. Kelly, why don't you start us off talking a little bit about on-site near-site clinics?
Yeah, so again, as DJ said, these tend to be a little more focused on the self-insured piece for those employers that are looking to get more control. So on-site near-site clinics, and I'm going to throw direct primary care as a third area on that. But basically, an on-site near-site clinic is simply like it sounds like. You would have a clinic either on your campus or a centrally located site that your employees can go and access. There are some values to that, but there are also some negatives as well. A lot of times what we're seeing is on the on-site near-site, we may not see a true dollar-for-dollar return on it. It is a fantastic benefit for your employees, but be thoughtful about how you put it in and where you put it in, the hours of access, so that employees can actually have the time to get to that. Now, it typically is for that acute care, those low-level type care. It is for the colds and the pink eyes and the flu. In some cases, it's the same thing that telemedicine could take care of, that you don't actually have to be on site for. You could make a phone call. But then there are other cases where you might be able to get blood work done. You could get your flu shots. Those things you do need to be in person on, but it's still not real primary care. It is more of acute care, right, DJ?
Yeah.
Now, there's a third trend, and I'm sorry, DJ, let me finish the last piece and I'll hand it over, we're starting to see, and really just starting to see it in our area, is a thought around direct primary care, which I would attach to this, but the difference being is that you set up a capitated fee to true primary care physicians. It's not a clinic where you go in and you get your flu shot or you get some tests done. It is truly, you create a relationship with a primary care physician. But instead of it being a fee for service, it would be a capitated fee, whether or not the employee goes once, never, or 20 times. And the idea being is that the primary care physician tries to really get control of what's going on with that person's health and creating a relationship. So we're seeing, we saw the on-site, near-site where it started, but we're seeing it really develop beyond that into more of a direct primary care.
Yeah. And I think what that bleeds into is wellness, preventive medicine, chronic care management for those folks that have chronic care conditions. And that begins to get to the root of at least some controllable problems that you might have in your healthcare spend. The next would be direct pricing arrangements with local hospitals. We're starting to see some of this, where folks are getting what they call a direct contract with a hospital or facility. The reason that this is starting to come up, honestly, is, and this kind of is a secondary piece, and you might have heard of this in the marketplace, called reference-based pricing. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in another slide, but it's this idea of not having a network, but getting a negotiated price based on Medicare. And when that becomes an option, or that looks like something that we want to evaluate for a company, it's always important to see, can you get some level of direct contract with a hospital or facility in order to make sure that your folks have access. And that really comes back to where are your people located, and then can we get the best of both worlds? Can we get access where our folks aren't disrupted, where they can go to a doctor or physician they would normally go to anyway,
Right.
but also try to keep our costs down. And that's the balance that the marketplace is trying to achieve, and that's one of the ways it's doing it. Another option is RX sourcing outside the U.S. This has become more prevalent, where folks are looking, pharmacy costs have shot through the roof, and people are looking for opportunities to push that cost down. Some opportunities are shipping some medications in from Canada on a member basis if they wish to do that on a voluntary basis, and that can produce some savings as well. It's not for everybody, and some folks would probably hear me say that and go, our employees would never go for that. We never want to, we wouldn't want to have that option, but it is a trend that's out there, and I think it's good to be aware of it.
Yeah.
So moving on, let's kind of circle back around. We kind of talked about some local trends, some new trends for this year. We do want to tell you kind of where the folks are in this survey, right? We've looked at some national data, but we did have 53% of our respondents took the survey from our 2018 survey year. And 80% of our folks that are in the survey had more than 50 employees. The folks that are in this survey are ones that are looking for innovative ways to improve their benefits, but they are, your neighbors, your local employers. Everyone, Paducah, Benton, Mayfield, Murray, up to Henderson, Owensboro, and over to Bowling Green and Franklin, where Kelly's sitting right now. So we kind of started more in far Western Kentucky, and we've expanded more into Central Kentucky as more employers have wanted to be a part of this, and we look forward to continue to expand that over the years. So let's go to the basics, right? What benefits are local companies offering? We talked about this before. The health, life, vision, dental, disability are high on the list. Then we get into wellness, or some of those ancillary or voluntary products like cancer, critical illness and accident, FSAs, some tuition reimbursement programs of some type, and then professional development, right? Mm-hmm. This is one of those where I'd say, make sure you're taking credit. Are you giving people access to training to better themselves and better their careers? If so, make sure that you're putting that in your benefits guide or your offerings, and making sure that you're taking credit for the great things you're doing for your people.
And don't be afraid to expand this a little bit, making sure you're thinking about what the employees might want. And there's some of these can be very, very low cost to you as an employer, but brings a lot of value to the employees.
Yes, for sure. And then another growing trend, 20% of local employers are offering some type of financial education as a benefit. That could be plugged into an overall wellness benefit, or it could be a separate program where you're giving opportunity for folks to learn about budget classes, or how to balance a budget, just how to be financially responsible. Maybe you're bringing in your 401k provider to talk about the marketplace and investment strategy, and what they should be doing, and based on what the market's doing right now. So I would encourage it. I think we've had that at Phil and Holland for a while, either some of the basic level financial education information that's available through a wellness portal, or the higher end, hey, sit down, talk with a wellness or a financial advisor, and try to get your financial future in check.
And you're going, why should I do this? I'm sure most of you have heard, if somebody has financial issues, they're probably not totally at work. They may be they may be at work physically, but mentally they may not be totally focused. And so the more you can help them to resolve those types of issues, the more they can be completely focused at work and be more productive.
Yeah. And talking back towards the high deductible health plans, I mean, statistics say that most folks don't have $1,000 in savings.
Right.
And your deductible might be a $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 deductible. So if that's the case, how do you make sure to help people work towards those savings goals, whether that's in a health savings account or other opportunities, to make sure that they are taken care of when it comes to their benefits? So financial definitely plays a part in that. And I would encourage everyone to at least look at what you could do in those areas. So a little bit more of the data in the survey. There's kind of two main categories when we talk about how you can fund your health plan, fully insured or self-funded. And there's pros and cons to both. Self-funded, you have the opportunity to control more of your costs because you are getting more information and are able to hone in on what's driving that and then put some of those point solutions in place to make an impact. But it doesn't come without its risk, right? You're on the hook for more when it comes to claims, and you have to pay, those claims up until a certain level or threshold, like a stop-loss carrier. Fully insured, people, you're not really getting a lot of health information or claims information typically. You can in certain situations. But given that, you're really just told what your premium's going to be. And then back to what we were talking about earlier, if you want to adjust your premium amounts, you need to change your plan, or you need to look at a different carrier. And that puts an employer kind of in a tough position of how do we make sure to get the best out of our program.
We've seen recently, probably in the last year to year and a half, more folks looking at self-funded than ever. And we're going to talk in a minute about some tools and resources that are allowing smaller groups to go self-funded, where it wouldn't necessarily be reasonable, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You had to be a fairly large group to be able to really consider to be self-funded and to make it really work. But now you can actually be a much smaller group and look at self-funded. But as DJ said, it's risk and reward. You take a little risk on the self-funded, but there's an opportunity for rewards. Fully insured is safe, or we think it's safe because we have a fixed cost. But if you have a bad year, even in fully insured, the next year, what happens? You're going to get an increase. So, one way or the other, the claims are going to be covered, whether it's an increase in fully insured the next year or you have higher claims in self-funded.
Yeah. Our data is slightly skewed. The folks in the survey, we had, over 50% that were self-funded or partially self-funded in some way. It's most of the employers that we're either working with or folks that we know in the industry that have some level of self-funding. This is not, I would say, indicative of the overall Kentucky or Western Kentucky marketplace, but just those in the survey. And one thing you think about that when the people participating in this survey are ones that are consistently trying to push the envelope on improving the benefits. So that's going to lean more towards people that are willing to jump into the self-funded pool. Doesn't mean it's always the right play, right? But it does mean that it's always, it's worth evaluating and looking at. And as Kelly mentioned, especially in that, 50, 100 space, we're seeing more folks that are at least willing to investigate those options. And one of those ways is what we're going to talk about next, the group medical captive. So Kelly, talk about this for us.
Yeah, so this is an area that's not really new. It's been around 20 plus years, but we're really seeing it in the last couple, 3 years really begin to enter the market space, at least in Kentucky. And this is not designed to make you an expert on any of this. So at a very high level, this allows you to be self-insured, and that's in the dark blue. You're going to retain some of that risk. You're going to pay a certain portion of claims, but once it gets to a certain point, then it goes to what's called a medical captive. A medical captive is simply, it's a nice way of saying lots of employers are going to get together and we're going to cover each other's back. We're going to have a second layer that's going to cover any claims over a certain dollar amount, depending on what your plan looks like. And each employer puts money into that medical captive. And at the end of the year, if the captive has a good year, the money that's left over, guess what happens to it? Comes back to you. So you have the potential to retain funds in your claims fund, the darker blue. So if you have a good year, you don't use all that money, you retain those funds. But then the second level, instead of going directly to an insurance company and losing that money in premiums, you share it with other employers. And at the end of the year, you potentially get money back. And in most cases, almost all captives will have some kind of distribution back. And then at the gray area, then when you get into the really large claims, and clearly you have reinsurance, and you're paying traditional premiums where that money just goes away and you don't get it back. It's designed and allows groups as small as 20 to really look at a self-insured environment to get some of the benefits of that self-insured without taking all the risk that you would see in a more traditional self-insured program. It's something that you should look at and consider, but I will say this: if you're looking at any kind of self-insurance, whether it's a traditional partially self-insured or group medical captive, please make sure you understand it. Ask 10,000 questions. Never buy what you don't understand.
Yep.
If your advisor is not helping you to fully understand it, then it's not right for you, or maybe the advisor is not doing a good job. You need to make sure you understand how it works. And there's two sides of that. All great salespeople will tell you, here's the wonderful part. Oh, you're going to save tens of thousands of dollars. It's going to be great. But a really good advisor is going to say, but here's what it looks like when it blows up.
Yep.
Here's what the negative, here's what the downside is. So make sure you understand, certainly you want to look at the positive, but you also want to understand what's the negative and what's the exit strategy if you were to look at this. But it is definitely something we're seeing a strong growth in the last couple of years. That, along with something we're going to call reference-based pricing, we're going to talk about in just a minute. Next slide. There you go.
So reference-based pricing, again, this is not meant to make you experts on this, but this is in the marketplace, and we want you to just know that when you hear these terms, you're like, oh yeah, those guys at Peel and Hall, they mentioned it, and I think I understood what they were talking about. Some of you might be in plans today where you're using a concept or a portion of this. Actually, all of you are using a portion of this regardless, even if you don't know it, because even if you're in an Anthem or a Humana or a United Healthcare contract, on the back end, you never know this, but on the back end, some of those carriers, for some of the claims that are coming through, are negotiating them based on a percentage of Medicare. That's what they're doing. This is actually just putting it in place for you as an employer to try to take advantage of those opportunities for savings. But this is a basic example, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but from a high level, what this means is whenever you have a claim and you're self-funded, when that gets billed to the insurance, the provider, the hospital facility, say they have a large-scale surgical procedure, right? They bill that to the insurance company and they say it's going to cost us $90,000 to do this procedure. Well, they pre-negotiated a discount with your insurance carrier or your network, and let's say that's a 50% discount. Well, when that connects, right, and they say, okay, well, we've audited that, and you only have to pay 50%, your bill obviously drops down to $45,000. That's the dark blue bar. Well, Medicare average cost for that same procedure might be closer to $12,000. That's what Medicare would pay if someone was on Medicare and had that exact same thing done at that same facility. Well, in all honesty, Medicare average probably won't help pay the bills for a facility, specifically any kind of rural hospital facilities. And so when we've heard that same conversation from folks that we've worked with. So the goal is not to get it down to Medicare, but what if you could take what Medicare pays that's consistent over time and is a very low trend when it comes to inflation, and you said, well, we just want to pay what Medicare pays plus some, right? Plus what it costs for the hospital to make their, pay their costs, pay their physicians, things of that nature. And that's where reference-based pricing comes from. They're referencing the Medicare, and they're basing it on that, and they're paying a percentage over it. And so in this example, the reference-based pricing and negotiated amount would be closer to $30,000, $28,000 and change. So in that example, you're saving, 16, 17 grand from what the insurance carrier does. Now, but here's the negative. As Kelly just mentioned, it's nice to talk about the positive things. I think it's also important for you to know the negative things. When you're in a reference-based pricing, you do not have a contract with these providers unless you do, like we talked about earlier, and you have a direct contract with a single hospital facility. They don't have to pay what you are asking them to pay. It's not negotiated. It's not agreed upon. And so what happens with reference-based pricing is if a provider says, we're not going to negotiate with you, or we're not going to pay what you ask us to pay, then that could go up to the total that you would pay with the insurance carrier anyway. But it could go all the way up to whatever they would have billed previously at the $90,000. So that's where the risk is making sure that you have anybody that's entertaining this. There's a couple things I would just point out. You want to make sure that you have understanding of what your local hospitals are doing, and if you can have any kind of direct relationship. And two, you want to make sure that you have good partners when it comes to your third-party administrator that's going to be processing claims, and you want to make sure that you have a good person that's on the back end that is negotiating based on those prices. This is probably too much in the weeds, honestly, but if you, what gets on me is that it's a new shiny bullet in the industry. And what a lot of folks will do in this industry is come out and say, this is the thing that's going to save you all the money in the world. And they won't give you the information to make sure that you're making a right decision in this. And there are some pitfalls. So you got to investigate it. So what I would just encourage everyone to do is if you get something that says reference-based pricing on it, like Kelly mentioned before, you ask 10,000 questions, because there's a lot that can be great about this kind of offering. It's got a great concept to it. There's also some that could put you in a bind if you're not ready for it.
DJ, we are running a little bit behind, so for everybody, we're going to probably move a little quicker. We're always worried we don't have enough material. I'm always worried, and I always have way more. So hang on for the ride. We're going to make it through now on time.
What are the primary drivers of your health plan costs? For some folks, 14% of the survey were in that space where they didn't have as much claims information. They don't know. I would encourage everybody, if you don't know your claims data, see if there's a way to get to that. Because you can't affect things if you don't know what it is. The other primary cost drivers are high cost claimants with ongoing chronic conditions and RX. And we're seeing that across the board. How can I get my prescription costs down? How can I help folks that have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, and make sure that they're doing the preventive care they need to keep costs in control?
Information is power. The more information you have, the more you're going to be able to put in cost containment programs that will actually impact the claims over time. So
yes,
more information is better.
Another thing that I think might be interesting to you is employer percent of contribution to total premium. This is how much you as an employer are paying towards the cost of the healthcare. Our survey, the local average for single is 86%. The employer's paying 86% of the total cost. Families around 69%. And based on national stats, the national data says singles about 84, families around 60. Now,
I would say though to be careful, because these numbers will vary wildly based upon your industry.
Yes.
I mean, these are averages, and you'll see it can really vary by size, by industry, big time.
Yes, 100%. And what I would tell everyone involved as well is, just because you're not hitting one of these averages or above one of these averages does not mean that you don't have a valuable health plan for your folks. There can be intentional reasons why you don't pay as much on family coverage, or you don't pay as much on single coverage, because you're offering these other ancillary benefits, or you've done these other programs. So that in and of itself doesn't mean that your health plan is bad, but I think it is a good benchmark to look at and say, okay, where are we in relation to this, and what other things are we doing to help our people? Other areas that are in this survey, averages on deductibles, out-of-pocket maximums, overall cost exposure to people, drugs, wellness programs, voluntary benefits, PTO and vacation and retirement plans. We tried to cover as much as we can, as succinctly as we can, for everyone that takes the time to do the survey. And again, we appreciate everyone that has. And for those of you on the survey today, some of you I know have taken it, and we are either delivering those results to you or in process of scheduling delivery of that. But if you haven't, we want to make an offer for those of you that have not, because we won't be doing the survey again in 2021. But the 2020 survey, what we're going to offer for all the folks on the call today is to take it. We've got a live link out there. You can go out, take that survey, and once you get that information in, we'll build you out an executive summary based on the other 2020 data and your information to kind of see how you would have stacked up against that survey information. You can also just go and visit our website and download a highlights version, which isn't the full version of the information, but it has a good portion of that data in there as well. And I'd encourage you, if there's anything that you have questions on, that you'd like to talk about, my information's here, and feel free and give me a call, shoot me an email. I'll be happy to talk with you on any of this information, and would love to hear feedback from this community on things that you would love to see the next time we do this benchmarking and the survey, or maybe it's something other than the actual benefits information that you feel like it would be a real benefit to know what other employers in the region are doing.
DJ, Vanessa asked if we could put up the previous slide one more time, and yeah. I'm not sure exactly which slide that would be. Vanessa, can you tell us which one that you'd like to see? We're happy to do that. Or we can make this presentation available, and that may be the best thing to do, DJ. Maybe we just make it available as a PDF and send it out to everybody. That way, Vanessa, would that work if we just made it available and sent it out to everybody? Hopefully that'll work for you, because I'm not sure exactly which one you're looking for. Are there any questions? We got maybe a couple of minutes. We want to get you guys out, because I know the next one's 9:30. Are there any questions you have at this point? I don't see any popping up, and we are right on time, 9:25. So we appreciate everybody. We appreciate your hard work. We know that this is a unusual time that we're all dealing with in 2020. Hopefully, fingers crossed, 2021 looks a little more normal. And thank you for all the hard work that you've put in this year for your employees. We know that they appreciate it, and we know you put a lot of time and effort in.
And I would just like to say too, I noticed some of the nominees for the awards for this year, and a ton of great folks on here. Mariah Dykes, Catherine Lanier, Patrick Howell, Jamaica Stray, Carla Wiggins, Crystal Valentine, Randy Gray, our own Janice Winder. Just congratulations for being nominated in your respective categories. And I know you all are rock stars and doing a great job. So congratulations to you. And if we can do anything, be of help, assistance to you or your team, we're always happy to be another resource for you. And if you'd like to get more information on the survey, feel free and check out the link. But thank you so much.
DJ and Kelly, thank you so very much for that great presentation and all that fantastic information. We've got about 4 minutes before our next person comes to the main stage. So let's take a quick break and give everybody a chance to stretch their legs and refill your coffee. We will be back at the bottom of the hour. Welcome back to the show, and we are ready to move forward with our next sponsor. And I'd like to introduce Phil and Deb Domke, owners of Payroll Vault, to the main stage. Let me get you guys on here right now.
Good morning. Thank you for attending this session of the FourRivers SHRM Conference. This session is titled The New Normal, How COVID Has Impacted Employees in Its Workplaces, and is sponsored by Payroll Vault. Prior to introducing our speakers, I wanted to give you some brief information about Payroll Vault. We are a national franchise. We were founded in 2008, franchised in 2012. We currently have 54 offices nationwide. Payroll Vault benefits from a national collaboration with other offices in its corporate office, giving Payroll Vault a large firm feel and expertise, or large firm expertise and technology, but with a small firm feel. Each one of our offices is locally operated, and the Payroll Vault office in Kentucky was opened in 2017. Payroll Vault's mission is ensuring compliance with IRS, state, and local tax agencies. Each client gets a dedicated payroll specialist. This enables our employees to get to know your company and its specific needs. The combination of a dedicated payroll specialist and not using call centers allows us to provide top-notch customer service. Payroll Vault is a full-service payroll company. We provide live payroll processing. Here's a couple of our services we provide to our clients. No charge direct deposit and pay cards, obviously tax filings. We have employer online access and employee online access. And we also help with retirement plan uploads to TPAs. At Payroll Vault, we have a number of vetted partners that we provide a wide array of professional services through, including HR support services, time and attendance, background checks and drug screening, pay-as-you-go work comp, and a few more. The Payroll Vault approach, in closing, is to be a more consultative company to our clients' payroll needs. We work with our clients to support the individual needs of each company. The combination of a tailored solution for your company and a dedicated payroll specialist allows Payroll Vault to provide world-class customer service. And now I want to turn it over to Deb Domke, and she is going to introduce our upcoming speakers.
Our next session features valuable information we all need right now. Impact COVID-19 has had on Kentucky employers and their workplaces. First, I'd like to introduce Todd Logston, who is a partner at Fisher Phillips' Louisville office and co-chair of the firm's Workplace Safety and Catastrophe Practice Group. His practice is devoted to advising and representing employers regarding labor and employment law matters. Todd is regarded as a leader on occupational safety and health administration OSHA issues, including contesting and litigating OSHA citations, inspections, investigations, compliance audits, defending whistleblower retaliation claims, as well as providing OSHA compliance advice to clients. Todd Logston is a member of the firm's COVID-19 task force, a cross-disciplinary team of attorneys dedicated to advising employers on the many workplace law aspects of the global coronavirus pandemic. Todd holds 2 degrees from Murray State University and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Louisville Louis D. Brandeis School of Law, and has been listed as a Kentucky super lawyer since 2014 and in the Best Lawyers in America 2019 through 2021. Next, I'd like to introduce George Adams, who is also a founding partner in Fisher Phillips. His Louisville practice is exclusively devoted to advising and assisting and representing employers with labor and employment law challenges. George helps employers avoid union organizing and defend against unfair labor practice charges and grievances. He defends employers in state and federal courts against lawsuits alleging sexual harassment, unlawful discrimination, retaliation, wage and hour violations, and violations of the Family and Medical Leave Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, and other employment laws. He holds 2 degrees, including a Juris Doctorate from the University of Louisville Louis D. Brandeis School of Law. George has also repeatedly been recognized as a Kentucky super lawyer and repeatedly selected by his peers for inclusion in the Best Lawyers in America. Please join me in welcoming Todd and George.
Todd, I think you go first.
Todd, I think we're having a little technical difficulty. We're not actually getting your audio coming through the stream. George, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, so we're not hearing Todd at all.
Well, normally that's a good thing.
I think he can hear us because he just smiled. I'm going to remove you and add you back in and just see if that helps. I don't think it did. Okay, so he's left and he'll come back.
Okay, well, while we wait for Todd, I guess I can go ahead and get this started.
Outstanding. I'll step up.
Okay, and just tell Todd to start when he gets here. We're going to cover a number of things today. None of this is really new, hopefully. Most of you have been dealing with this for a long time. It's all about COVID-19 and how it affects what we call the new normal. So we're going to be talking about the reopening requirements, which have been around for months now, and they're still in place. We're not going to go into the specifics of any particular industry. We're going to focus mainly on the general reopening requirements that apply to all companies. Todd is going to talk about safety because he is an expert in safety and nobody knows more than he does that I've ever met. I'll talk a little bit about compensation and leave and HR issues. Todd will talk about the litigation that's been spawned by COVID-19 and all the various aspects of it. And then we'll wrap up with some miscellaneous issues. So the reopening requirements, I'm going to start with that. This is the governor's May 11th, 2020 order, which is virtually illegible at this screen size, I think. But anyway, it basically laid out the basic reopening requirements for all businesses. And initially, you were going to have to submit a plan to reopen, but the state was in a state of chaos at the time, and they eventually realized that was unrealistic. So you just had to comply with the requirements. Some of the requirements were these. You had to designate somebody to be in charge of the program, this Healthy at Work officer. So that would be similar to having a safety officer in your company. You had to have a phased return to work plan. So this is how we're going to get back to work. We're going to bring in 10% of our employees. We're going to have, X number of employees work from home. We're going to put up plastic barriers between work areas, whatever it might be. So there were all these different potential ways to limit interaction and contact between your employees. One of the biggest ones was a universal face mask requirement. And here, they're not really talking about a face mask in the traditional sense. What they're talking about is a cloth face covering, which everybody understands now and refers to as a mask, but that's what they're talking about. And that is pretty universal. You see those almost anywhere you go these days. And if you don't, odds are you'll complain about it to somebody. You had to restrict common area access. So this would be break rooms, restrooms, things like that, even elevators. On the occasions that we go into our building, it's a multi-story office tower. They've got signs up that say no more than 2 occupants in an elevator, but I've yet to see more than 2 occupants at all. It's usually just me, which is really unusual before the new normal. You had to do daily temperature and health checks, and I assume everybody is doing that. And employers have come up with a wide variety of interesting ways to handle that issue. One of the ways you can do it in Kentucky is you can have the employees self-check before they leave home. And if they aren't in compliance with any of the various factors, they just don't come in, they call you. You can, in addition to that, or as an alternative to that, do health checks at the door. with any number of different types of temperature reading devices. One thing that's come up recently is with cold weather coming, the no-touch temperature readers are becoming less effective or less accurate. And one of the ways around that is to use a touch type temperature reading device where you just roll it across the forehead or something along those lines where it has actual contact. You've probably seen those at your doctor's offices. Other things you have to do is accommodate vulnerable employees, which we'll talk about, and then obviously train employees on how to deal with this stuff.
Hey, George, I want to interrupt you just one quick second. We're going to try to stream Todd via the phone.
Great.
So, Todd, if you can just go ahead and say something, let's confirm that we can hear you. Still not coming through. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't hear you on speaker. Say that again, Todd.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Can you hear him on the stream, George?
I can.
Excellent. Okay. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Todd, you're on slide 9.
I'm not sure what happened there. George, where'd you leave off there while I was doing with?
Why don't you start with daily health and temperature screening? It's the slide that's up.
Okay.
Should be.
So part of the governor's order that still is valid, is still exists, hasn't been overturned yet, is the daily health screens. Kentucky has a list of specific questions that employees are supposed to answer prior to starting work. One of those is taking their temperature. If they have a temperature of 100.4 or higher, they can't work. If they can't pass the health screen, they can't work. And there's, I think, 3 or 4 different questions. And then one of the questions we get is, should we document the daily screens? And initially, there was a lot of confusion about whether you should document this and what kind of a record does that become? Well, it arguably becomes a medical record under the ADA. And it arguably becomes a medical record under OSHA. And if it is a medical record under OSHA, you have to keep that for 30 years after the employee leaves your employment. We've had some clarification that temperature screening is not going to be considered a medical record under OSHA. And so long as the questionnaires or the questions are asked or done by somebody who's not a medical person, not a doctor, a nurse, or a technician, then they don't become medical records under OSHA. You don't have to keep those for the 30 years. One option you could think about doing is having employees do this on their own. You communicate to them, you get sign off that they understand they have to do this every day. They do it, and then when they come to work, they're confirming to you that they've done this. That basically can be a thumbs up, thumbs down. Yeah, I passed the screen. Let's go on to the next slide, George. If you're going to do the screening on site, have somebody taking temperatures, you do need to think about the safety risk to the person doing it. So you need to assess what those risks are and come up with an appropriate way to protect them, whether that's through additional PPE, through a barrier, through having an automated system where you walk in and it scans your face or something like that. You be careful of that in Illinois, though you can't really use biometrics in Illinois. And then you can also go to the OSHA documents to classify the risk of your workplace. That puts it into 4 different categories, and that's OSHA document 3990. You can find that on the OSHA website. And let's go on to the next screen. Contact tracing. The order requires what you see on the screen here, that you need to be prepared to assist, be ready to answer the following questions that you can see on your screen there. There's nothing you really need to do to prepare for that. What I just recommend is that you have good documentation of your schedule, who's coming and going as far as visitors. You keep track of who's coming in and out of your facility, especially if it's not a public facility. Obviously, if you're open to the public, that's much, much harder to do at this point. But you need to be able to answer these questions if contact tracing contacts you. One thing I do want to caution you, I haven't seen this in Kentucky as much as I've seen it in other states, is the health department contacting an employer and saying, okay, give us the names and contact information for all of your employees. Even though you've had one positive test in one isolated part of your facility. And in one case up in Michigan, where I was helping an employer, when we asked the health department, well, why would you need all 500 names as a plan? They said, well, we're going to call them all and tell them to quarantine. well, you only have one person in one part of the plant here that's tested positive. How about we give you the 3 names of the people that person worked with? And they didn't like that at first, but we finally said, well, this is what we're going to give you. If you want to require more, then we'll meet you at the courthouse. And they backed off. So do be careful about that. If they're asking you for more information other than about the person who's tested positive and their schedule, you're not probably obligated to give them a whole lot more than that unless they produce an order or a subpoena. Let's go to the next one. Okay, we have a mask requirement in Kentucky. I'm sure everyone's aware of. George already talked about this. This has been extended multiple times now, and basically the governor keeps extending it about 30 days. I think he's trying to do that to not run afoul of the court's injunctions that you can't just do this in perpetuity. So I think every 30 days until this is over, you're probably going to see that renewed. Let's go on to the next one. All right, so Kentucky employers, you're already required to provide the cloth-based coverings for the minimum requirements. And then if you considered it to be PPE, you have additional requirements. Federal OSHA has come out now and said that cloth face coverings are not going to be considered PPE. So they don't really protect the wearer. They're supposed to contain the virus. Basically, we all wear a mask. It's supposed to reduce the spread. But if there's other things you're having employees wear, for example, face shields or actual respirators, N95s, those are PPE. You need to do an assessment. You have to make sure you've got the right one. There's respirators. There's got to be fit testing, medical evaluations, and you have to do training for the employees. But even if you're not considering masks to be PPE, let's go on to the next slide, George. These are things you ought to think about doing just to make sure your employees are wearing the mask appropriately. Train them on how to actually wear them, how to remove them, how to dispose of them, so that you're further reducing the chances that you're spreading anything. And I think that you're going to be on better footing with OSHA or the health department if they show up. I'm not sure if George mentioned this earlier while I was trying to figure out how to get online here. But in Kentucky, Kentucky OSHA has been tasked with enforcing this order. So prior to this order coming out, the first order that just shut everything down, OSHA was actually going out even to essential businesses and shutting businesses down if they weren't following social distancing. This was back before masks were mandated. Since this order came out May 11th, they've gone out and they have a little bit gentler, more gentle approach where they give you a notice. And they say, here's the things you're not doing right. Notify us in writing that you're going to fix these things and we won't shut you down. If you don't agree to do this, then we will come back and shut you down. So we've had to represent some clients with Kentucky OSHA to get through that. And these haven't been OSHA citations for those issues. This has been OSHA enforcing this order. We've also seen it from the health department. So you get either the health department or Kentucky OSHA. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so if you're requiring PPE or the accommodation or the mask, you have to think about accommodations if an employee can't wear one. This is really under the ADA. To the extent it's PPE, OSHA says you have to make sure it fits. You have to have different sizes for people. But for under the ADA, you have to engage in that interactive process you would under the ADA if an employee is saying, I can't wear a mask or I can't wear a respirator because. Then you have to figure out, is there another way I can help protect this employee if they can't use a mask or can't use the PPE, or if it's just a mask, protect all the other employees. So you have to think about, can I do remote work? Can I move them somewhere else in the building? I've got an example on here. If somebody has a latex allergy and you're asking them to wear gloves as part of the job, you may have to get a non-latex glove. So just keep in mind, it's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to mask or PPE. Next, George. Okay, we're going to bleed into the safety here. If you're subject to OSHA record keeping, and you probably know if you are already, then you do have to determine if you have a COVID-19 case, whether that's work-related, and if it is, you have to record that on your OSHA 300 log. You have to, the rules, and these rules have changed a little bit from federal OSHA. We had a memo in April, another one in May that revised that one, and then you have another one in August or September that came out about record keeping and reporting. But the basics is if you have a confirmed COVID-19 case as defined by the CDC, that it was one of the actual tests, then you determine, is it work-related? And if it is, and then it involves one of the general reporting criteria, they miss work, they were treated and received medical treatment, such as prescriptions, that kind of thing, or they get hospitalized, then you're going to have to put that on your OSHA log. The very first memo that OSHA came out with, federal OSHA came out with, said basically if you're outside of healthcare, death care, and emergency care, and emergency response folks, you probably don't have to worry about this being work related. Then they changed that memo in May to say, no, it's the same rules for everybody. But I can tell you the experiences I'm having with Kentucky OSHA right now is they're taking the position, if you're in healthcare and somebody is diagnosed with COVID, they presume that it's work related. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think we have to go through this determination, but that's where Kentucky OSHA is coming from right now. They're saying they presume it work related if it's healthcare. If it's not healthcare, then you just have to go through this analysis and determine if you think it's work related. So, for example, the first person at your workplace that comes up with COVID, probably not work related. If the next person that gets COVID worked next to that first person in close contact, then that might be work related. So you just have to make those decisions about whether it gets put on the log. Then there's reporting requirements. In Kentucky, you can go on to the next slide, George. I can't remember if that's on the next slide. But in Kentucky, if so you can go back. If somebody is hospitalized because of a work-related injury or illness, which OSHA is saying COVID-19 could be, if you've determined that it is work-related and they are admitted to the hospital, not just went to the emergency room and left, but admitted to the hospital within 72 hours of the incident or the last exposure, so within 72 hours of the last time they worked for you, then you have 72 hours after you've made that determination to then report that to OSHA. Federal OSHA, it's 24 hours, but in Kentucky, it's 72 hours. Then if there's a fatality, somebody were to pass from COVID and you consider that work-related, you have 8 hours to report that to OSHA from the time you learn of the death and you've determined that it was work-related. Federal OSHA would say if that happened more than 30 days after the incident, or for COVID-19, more than 30 days after their last exposure, you don't have to report that. Kentucky doesn't have that limitation. So even if it's more than 30 days in Kentucky, you have to go ahead and call that in. Let's go on to the next slide. OSHA, either Kentucky OSHA or federal OSHA, has issued any specific COVID-19 standards, but there is guidance that OSHA has put out that they will use to cite you under the general duty clause if you have COVID-19 related hazards. That's why I'm saying you ought to be looking at that OSHA 3990 document. You can find that on OSHA's web page, and look into what risk you are and what steps you're taking. And a lot of that, if you're complying with the governor's order, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape on that. Places I've seen OSHA issue citations have been about the reporting that we were just talking about. If you have somebody hospitalized, you have somebody who passes, whether you've recorded it properly on your log, and then if you required respirators, that you have a respirator program, that you're doing fit testing, medical evaluation, and training, and then general duty clause. We're just starting to see the first citations in Kentucky. I think we're going to be contesting those first citations. So more to come on how this goes. I think they're not well founded, and our clients are going to not be subject to them. What we're seeing mostly from Kentucky, though, and federal OSHA, has been remote inspections, that they're not coming out on site very often. They started to do that a little bit more. I think with the numbers going up, we may see them coming out even less. You're also getting a lot of what they call rapid response or non-formal investigations, where they send you a letter, here's the complaint, you have to give them a written response. And then we've talked about the shutdown orders already. George, let's go on to the next slide. These are the things we recommend that you do to comply with the governor's order and comply with COSH and OSHA recommendations. And these are things we've already gone through in the order. I think again, you're going to reconfigure workstations, put distance between employees, put barriers between workspaces, modify your common areas, high-touch areas, and then make sure you're budgeting and providing for PPE, disposable wipes, hand sanitizers, masks, cloth-based covers, all that kind of stuff. I think you need to be doing those things. I think if you're not, you risk either getting a shutdown notice from Kentucky OSHA or the health department, or OSHA citations. Let's go on to the next one, George. And it's back to you.
Yep, my turn. I'll take it for a while. I'm going to talk about compensation and leave. A lot of this, like the rest, should be old news to you, but we're going to hit it anyway. We're going to start by talking about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which I'm guessing everybody has heard about now since it came out on April 1st of this year. It's been around for a little while. It applies to employers who have fewer than 500 employees and some public employers. I'm sorry, I can hear somebody in the background. Is that feedback? Okay, we'll try this again. In any event, it applies to employers who have 500 or fewer employees. And basically, it gives those employees two types of leave: emergency paid sick leave and emergency family and medical leave, a special type of emergency family and medical leave. This stuff is still relevant because this act remains in effect until December 31st of this year. It could go beyond that if Congress, decides to do that. But for right now, it's still effective for about another month and a half, I guess, or 2 months. And we're seeing spikes in cases around the state and around the country, really around the world. So even employees who haven't taken some sort of FFCRA leave so far may need it in the future. So you need to remain familiar with it and understand how it works. And it's available to full-time, part-time employees, employees on leave, temporary employees, virtually anybody except independent contractors. So let's talk about some of the details of that. The EPSL leave, Employee Paid Sick Leave Act, that requires you to give paid sick leave to employees who are unable to work for any one of several reasons, 6 of them to be exact. We're going to talk about the first 3 here on this page. If the employee is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19. Well, right now, nobody in Kentucky is subject to that sort of an order because that would be a statewide stay-at-home sort of order. There's no such order right now from this state or from the federal government. So for right now, you can kind of ignore item number 1. Item number 2 is the employee's been told by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine for COVID-19 related reasons. So if the employee, for example, goes to the health department and gets tested, regardless of the results, the health department, if the person is symptomatic, may recommend that they stay home. That would be self-quarantining. So they would be entitled to EPSL leave for that reason. If the employee is having symptoms of COVID-19 and seeking medical diagnosis, that's another reason for them to get this EPSL leave. So let's say your employee has, sudden loss of taste or smell, high fever, those types of things that are, consistent with the symptoms of COVID-19. They call up and say, I'm sick, I don't feel right, I'm going to go, get diagnosed. They're entitled to that EPSL leave. And this is paid leave. All right. I guess I should add something to that. I hadn't thought about this when I said it, but the EPSL leave is 2 weeks, up to 80 hours. It depends. If it's a part-time employee, it might be fewer than 80 hours, but it's 2 weeks of leave. It doesn't matter when they started. There's no waiting period for this. I should have said that. So they're eligible for this on day 1. They don't have to wait. If they're furloughed or if your company shuts down for a period of time, the original DOL regulation said that they're not entitled to EPL leave during that layoff period because they don't need leave if they're already off of work. A federal court in New York said those regulations went too far. They weren't justified and struck down that part of it. But since then, the DOL has issued new regulations which reinstate that provision. They've explained it a little more, and they've said that, if there's no work to do, you don't need leave. Therefore, you don't get paid sick leave. Sorry, I had that scribbled on notes, but I forgot to tell you that. All right. These are the other 3 reasons for EPL leave, paid sick leave. The employee is caring for somebody who's subject to an order for self-quarantine. So the employee's wife, for example, has been told to self-quarantine, or there's an order that says everybody who's, in X circumstances has to self-quarantine, and your employee needs to stay home to care for that person. So it would be the employee's spouse, family member, somebody like that, and the employee needs to stay home and care for them. Well, then they're entitled to this EPL leave. The rate of pay for leave under these 3 reasons is lower than it is under the first 3. The first 3, they get full pay. Under these 3, they get 2/3 of their regular rate, up to $200 a day. The next one is caring for a son or daughter if school or childcare is closed or unavailable. And this one overlaps with the Expanded Family Medical Leave Act leave, which I'll talk about in a minute. In this case, let's say the kid's school is closed, the building is closed, it's not open to anybody. Well, then the employee would qualify for this type of leave, paid leave. The same would be true if it was a child care facility, or if the babysitter is unavailable because he or she has COVID-19 or whatever the case may be. That's the qualification for number 5. Number 6 is a crapshoot. Nobody has any idea what experiencing any other substantially similar condition means. So if you hear of it first, let Todd and me know. Because right now, nobody has any clue, but it could be any number of a wide variety of things. All right, this brings us to the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Act, expanded leave. People use all kinds of different acronyms for this thing. We'll just call it EFMLA for today's purposes. They get 12 weeks of job protected leave if the employee is unable to work or telework, working remotely, because they need to leave. They need to care for a son or daughter, so it's a narrow range of people, whose school or place of care has been closed, or the child care provider is unavailable due to a public health emergency. So if there's a stay-home order and your babysitter lives a mile away, your babysitter can't come to your house to take care of your child, well, then you would be entitled to this EFMLA. Now, the EFMLA for the first 2 weeks is unpaid unless the employee uses some sort of paid leave, like vacation or something like that. After that, for up to 10 additional weeks, it's 2/3 of the regular pay rate, up to $200 a day. So what a lot of employees end up doing is using the employee paid sick leave to cover the first 2 weeks, overlapping the Emergency Family and Medical Leave extended benefit. So they get paid for those first 2 weeks, and then they start getting the lower rate of pay for the additional 10 weeks. And it can be up to 10 weeks. It can't be more than that. And these total of 12 weeks run concurrently with the total of 12 weeks under the FMLA. So it's not an additional 12 weeks. That's a question that comes up quite a bit. That part also had been attacked by the federal judge in New York, but since then the DOL has issued new regulations that overcome the problems the judge found with that. All right, when is school closed? This has come up a lot, and we got a lot of questions about this in Indiana when they reopened, because Indiana parents had the right to choose whether to send their kids to school or let them learn remotely. So we got all kinds of questions. Is school really closed if they have a choice? Well, the answer is school is not closed. School is closed only if the child cannot go to the school building. So in some states and in some counties, there's sort of a hybrid model where school is open to children with names, A through Z, or I'm sorry, A through M or whatever on Mondays and Tuesdays, and it's open to the other half of the alphabet on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and it's closed to everybody on Friday. And I'm sort of making that up, but you get the idea. It's a hybrid model. So some days the school is closed to some kids, other days it's closed to other kids, and on another day it's closed to all the kids. So parents would have the right to this Emergency Family Medical Leave Act leave on the days that the school is closed to their kids, but not on other days. So you have to watch and you have to understand what your local area is doing, what your local school district is doing, so you can determine whether employees are entitled to this leave on what days. Tax credits. I guess a bright side to this is that when you provide FFCRA leave, you get a tax credit for it. It's a credit applied against your Social Security taxes that you as an employer pay. So you need to keep track of the amounts that you pay under the FFCRA so that you can then apply for the tax credit at the appropriate time. And at least, while this may be a burden initially, at least there's an opportunity to recoup some of the burden later. You can also get a tax credit for costs that you incur to maintain the employee's health insurance, for example. The important part of this is that to get the tax credit, not only do you have to incur the expenses and pay the pay, you have to document what you did. So if you have employees taking leave under one of these two parts of the act, you need to document the dates of leave, the hours of leave they got, the amount of money you paid to them for each hour of leave, the reason for the leave. So is it under 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 of the Employee Paid Sick Leave Act, or is it under the FFC or the Employee Family Leave Act, or is it under both? You need to get all that stuff documented so that you can apply for and receive the tax credit. There are some exemptions. Sorry, I'm making a lot of noise at this end. You can elect to exempt some employees from these paid leave benefits, but it depends on what kind of an employer you are and what kind of employee the person is. It allows for a healthcare provider and first responder exemption. The first DOL regulations were really broad. They covered basically anybody that could apply a Band-Aid. You could exclude as a first responder or healthcare provider. The federal court said that was way overbroad. There was no justification for that in the act. And frankly, I agree. But the DOL issued a new definition. It's more narrow, and it basically follows the definition of healthcare provider under the FMLA, which is a lot more narrow. It's not going to cover, for example, RNs and general caregivers. There's also a small business exemption to the child care leave provisions, but only to those provisions. And you have to attest that providing the child care leave, because you're a small business, would jeopardize the actual viability of the company as a going concern. In other words, the expense would exceed the revenues, and you don't have anybody else to do the work. That only applies to employers with fewer than 50 employees. So, to know what you should do and how you should do it, look at your leave policies. Make sure that they comply with the new law, the FFCRA, if it applies to you. So if you're over 500 employees, you don't need to worry about compliance. If you're under 500 employees, you should look at this. Make sure that your existing policies outside of FMLA leave are flexible. And I recommend flexibility because this is an unusual circumstance. If you are too rigid about how you apply your non-statutory policies, you run the risk of losing employees that you might have a desire to keep. If you've got a really good employee who just happens to need leave that isn't covered by one of these acts, it might benefit you to find some way to accommodate that employee so that he or she can come back to work. The key to that, though, is making sure that you do it consistently so that you don't have one employee who says, well, you gave it to her, but not to me, or you gave it to a person of this race, and I'm of a different race, and you didn't give it to me because of our race. So you have to look at the consistency issues that you would normally look at in any other potential race or other type of discrimination. you might think about how this could apply to travel to so-called hotspots. It may be a little bit less important right now because every place is turning into a hotspot. But generally speaking, you can't stop an employee from going to a hotspot and using their vacation as they wish, but you can put conditions on it. You know, if you come back from a hotspot and the governor says that if somebody comes back from a hotspot, they should quarantine for 14 days. Well, that's fine. Go enjoy your hotspot vacation. But when you come back, we're not going to let you come to work for 14 days because the governor says you can't. You can go self-quarantine. If you have PTO available, you can use it, et cetera. But otherwise, you'll be unpaid. So think about that, but also think about the morale implications of that. Try to be flexible in the way you apply your leave policies. An important thing to keep in mind is that, I'm sorry, did somebody have something to say? Okay, I guess not. Thought I heard background chatter. In Kentucky, you don't have any sort of an obligation to provide paid leave at all. It's not a statutory requirement. So if you decide to provide vacation or PTO pay, you're only bound by whatever policy you came up with. Now, you have to follow your policy. You can't just say, heck with it, I'm not going to give people the PTO that they've earned or accrued, but you're not governed by the law, so to speak, the statutory laws. Kentucky hasn't come up with any special requirements for paid leave related to COVID-19. So there's no state version of the FFCRA. If you do provide paid leave, you allow people to accrue it under Kentucky state law. If you send somebody out on some kind of a furlough or something of that nature, you either have to let them use the PTO if they want to, or if they don't use it, you have to let them, I guess, have access to their PTO bank when they return to work. So unless your rules say, you know, if you don't use this before you're laid off, for example, you'll lose it, you'd be able to do that. But most employers don't have a policy like that. Most employers say that you keep it banked until termination, and then the rules of termination vary from one employer to another. But just follow your policy. All right, do we have to keep paying employees who are not working? Well, the general answer to that is no. If employees are not working, they're not entitled to pay. That is a little bit different in the case of salaried exempt employees, but I'm not going to get into that deeply. The FLSA and the state law equivalent of that in Kentucky basically says you only get paid when you work. You don't get any overtime pay in a given work week unless you've worked at least 40 hours in that week. So let's say that you use 30 hours of emergency paid sick leave in a week, and you work 12 hours in that week. Well, you've got 42 hours of pay, but you've only got 12 hours of work. So you only get overtime if you've worked more than 40 hours. So in that scenario, the employee would not be entitled to overtime. There's a difference between time worked and time paid. People who have unionized workforces will be very familiar with that concept. Can we charge absences to vacation and leave balances? In other words, can I force somebody to use their PTO or their vacation pay if they're not here? Well, the FLSA and the state equivalent of the FLSA, and I guess I should say what that is just in case anybody doesn't know, it's the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's the federal law that generally governs wage and hour and overtime. Generally speaking, those laws don't require or regulate how paid leave is used or can be used, or how it's counted, when it can be forced. I think I mentioned earlier the salary requirements for exempt white collar type of employees could implicate paid leave, use under certain circumstances. So the general rule under the FLSA and in the state law is if I'm salaried exempt and I work at all this week, I get paid my entire salary for the week. Your vacation pay policy or your PTO policy may say something like, okay, fine, I have to pay you, but if you're not working 3 out of 4 days and you've got PTO, you have to use it. It's a substitute for the pay you would earn. But, you know, if you're out of PTO, I can't force you to use something you're out of, so I still have to pay you for the whole week. But you can mandate the use of PTO for certain absences. So what you have to do is basically governed by, you know, your policies, or if you have some sort of employment contract with somebody, which is relatively unusual unless that person is a high-level executive, or you're subject to a labor agreement with a union. Those are the things that govern what you can and can't do with respect to forced use of paid leave. Hazard pay, that came up a lot, or at least a lot early on. Employees, and especially unionized employees, wanted hazard pay because they had to work while COVID-19 was really hot. Whether you had to give that was determined by collective bargaining agreements if you had one. Otherwise, you had no obligation to give it at all. But if you give hazard pay, generally that means, you know, a premium for working in a hazardous condition. Let's say, you know, instead of paying $15 an hour, I'm going to pay you $16 an hour because you're working in a hazardous condition. Well, if you do that, that's fine, but you have to include that additional dollar per hour in the regular rate for purposes of overtime. So it drives overtime rates up as well as the base hours. Something you need to look at really carefully, especially if you have people working remotely, is off the clock work. If you are a non-exempt hourly employee, you're entitled to be paid for every hour that you work, even if the employer didn't authorize it or didn't know about it. So if I'm a non-exempt employee and I'm working from home and the employer says don't work more than 8 hours a day, but I'm a go-getter, so I say, okay, I'm only going to report 8 hours a day, but by golly, I'm going to spend another hour and a half working to get ahead of things. Well, I'm entitled to be paid for that hour and a half. And you know, if I don't report it, shame on me. But if and when I do report it, you have to pay me for that time. And if that time drives me over the 40-hour mark, that time is included in calculating the regular rate and calculating my overtime. You have to come up with some sort of a system to make sure that employees keep accurate records of all the time they work. So if they're working on a computer, it's fairly easy to do a keystroke monitor that identifies the times they started, the times they stopped, and if you want to get into the details, all the time that were actually sitting there tapping keys and doing work. There's any number of ways you can monitor that stuff, but to the extent they're working, they have to be paid. And you have to make a reasonable effort to keep track of it. If somebody works more time than you told them they should, you have to pay them, but you can also discipline them for ignoring your rule. So you need to keep track of that stuff. The next bullet there is if you want to bring people back for partial weeks, again, salaried exempt employees have to be paid for the full week's salary if they do any work during that week. Now, you might come up with some sort of a negotiated lower salary for lower work. So let's say instead of working my normal 5 days a week, you and I agree that I'm only going to work 3 days a week. And as a consequence, I'm going to get 60% of my normal salary. Well, you can come to that sort of an arrangement with a salaried exempt employee, but it has to be in writing and it can't fluctuate from one week to the next. If we're going to come to that sort of an arrangement, it has to be fairly long term. I would say at least several months, and it can't change all the time. Otherwise, they're no longer salaried, and thus they're not exempt. So if you want to think about doing something like that, I strongly recommend that you consult with an employment lawyer to make sure you don't end up ruining the salaried exemption. Unemployment benefits, everybody's favorite thing. Kentucky employees can get unemployment if their hours are reduced. So if they normally work 40 hours a week and you reduce them to 20 hours per week, they can get some employment benefits for the lost 20 hours. There is no waiting week right now. The governor waived the waiting week because of COVID-19. The governor also waived this physically able to work requirement. So, for example, if they're off because of COVID-19, the physical ability to work and looking for work requirement is waived. They can still get unemployment benefits. The benefit term has also been increased from 26 weeks to 39. Kentucky unemployment benefits max out at $552 a week, but as you may recall, the federal government was giving employees an additional $600 per week, which caused a lot of employees to decide they would prefer to remain unemployed rather than come back to work when that benefit ran out, or I should say until that benefit ran out, which was on July 31st. If you've not been living under a rock, you may notice that Congress has been debating whether to extend that benefit since at least mid-July, but hasn't done so yet. I'm not optimistic that they'll do that in the next week before the elections. Depending on how the elections turn out, they may or may not do it between now and mid-January. I don't think we need to say anything more about that. An employee who refuses to return to work when they're recalled could be eligible for continued benefits, but only if there's a valid qualifying reason for it. The Kentucky Unemployment Commission has said that not working because you want to self-isolate to care for your kids or others is a legitimate reason. It's a good reason to stay off work and continue receiving unemployment benefits. And they've gone a little farther than that. They've encouraged employees who are not working for COVID, not working because of COVID, to apply for unemployment benefits. And again, if you've not been living under a rock, you may have noticed that whether you actually get your unemployment benefits in Kentucky varies dramatically for no apparent reason. Some people have gotten their benefits immediately when they applied for them. Others have been waiting months and can't get through to the commission to figure out why. It's a terrible mess. It has been the whole time. Maybe they'll eventually get that sorted out, but I wouldn't count on it. Okay, if you recall an employee from furlough or from layoff, regardless of the reason, you're supposed to report that person the same way that you would a newly hired employee. So you report to the state that you have rehired this person, and that requires you to give the state the federal and Kentucky employment identification numbers, the name of your business, your address, the employee's information, including the name, mailing address, etc., and the date of rehire. So if I let somebody go in July on a furlough because of COVID-19 and now things are getting back to normal and I'm calling back parts of my workforce, I need to remember to call the state and give them this information and treat it as a rehire. All right, the next one is my employee claims he contracted coronavirus while he was at work. Will that result in a compensable workers' comp claim? The answer, as lawyers like to say, depends. Depends on the circumstances. If the employee is a healthcare provider or a first responder or something like that, the answer probably is yes, because there's a higher probability that they contracted the virus while at work. If they're in any other kind of profession, the answer is less likely to be yes. For one thing, coronavirus is all over the place right now. You're at least as likely to get it at the grocery store or church or anywhere else as you are to get it at work, maybe more so, because at work, most employers are requiring employees to wear masks, social distance, and all those other things. But when you go out into the real world, you can't control what other people are doing. So you may be around people who don't wear masks, don't wash their hands, don't do any of the things that are supposed to reduce the spread of the virus. It's also important to note that the virus, if you contract it, is not an injury. It might be an occupational disease, but it's not an injury. So if you want to get workers' comp benefits for an occupational disease, you generally have to show two things. One is you have to show that the disease arose out of and was caused in the course of employment. And you have to show that it arose out of or was caused by conditions peculiar to the work that you do and it creates a risk of contracting the disease in a greater degree and in a different manner than in the public generally. Now, that's a very stilted description, but it's worth saying it because that's the legal description. And it makes it hard for an employee to claim that they got coronavirus in the workplace, because except in the cases of healthcare provision and first responders, there's nothing peculiar about most workplaces that make employees more susceptible to getting the disease there. In fact, I think I would make the argument they're more likely to get it anywhere else, at least right now. Workers' comp, some changes, and these came about by executive order. Removal from work by a doctor because of occupational exposure entitles the employee to temporary total disability benefits, even if the claim is denied and there's no waiting period. And I think the idea behind this is they wanted to give employees the benefit of a doubt so that if they were out of work for one reason or another, they wouldn't be destitute while the commission was trying to work things out and figure out what happened. So the idea is you're going to get the benefit of doubt, you're going to get the benefits themselves, and that may change after the fact, but we're not going to make you give it back, is basically what the state has said. Touching on what I said before about who might be exposed to COVID-19, the state has come up with some ideas of what might be presumptive exposures. Healthcare and first responders are top of the list. Corrections officers handle a lot of prisoners. Prisoners typically don't show a lot of respect to corrections officers. So they have a presumption that they might have contracted it in the workplace, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the previous presenters mentioned that they'll make their presentations available after the show, and Todd and I are willing to do that too. So you don't have to write furious notes. All right, HR issues. I'm going to try to roll through this section fairly quickly. Special accommodations. The Kentucky minimum requirements that apply to all employers also require all employers, to the greatest extent practicable, to make special accommodations for employees and customers who are at higher risk for severe illness. In other words, if they get COVID-19, they're more likely to be hospitalized or die from it. That makes them at higher risk for severe illnesses. One of the accommodations that might be required would be remote work, but you're not required to grant remote work just because somebody has a heart condition or a lung disease or something like that, or just because they're very old. Even though they're at higher risk, you're not automatically required to allow them to do remote work. Say they're a factory worker and their job is shooting screws and sheet metal. Well, they can't do that from home. So it wouldn't be reasonable to let them stay home to do work. On the other hand, if they are, if they work in an office and a significant amount of their work can be done remotely, then maybe that would be reasonable. It might be reasonable to let them work remotely, but if they're not doing all their normal job duties, maybe you pay them a little bit less, or maybe you move them to a different part of the facility where they're less likely to come into contact with other employees and therefore less likely to contract the virus. Any number of possible accommodations for that. The executive order doesn't create more rights than the ADA has, and the ADA doesn't necessarily encompass COVID-19 as a disability. And that's because it's a transitory sort of disease. It's like the flu. Because I get the flu doesn't make me ADA disabled. The same would be true if I got COVID-19. Now, maybe if I have lingering effects of it, like I can't catch my breath even after I've been released from the hospital, maybe I'd be disabled at that point. But generally speaking, just having COVID-19 doesn't make somebody disabled. I think I just answered this, so I'll skip that one. The EEOC says you can't exclude employees solely because they have a disability that the CDC identifies as potentially putting them at higher risk for severe illness from COVID-19. Another stilted description, but it's important to follow the words that the government uses when it talks about statutory rights. In this case, They say you can't exclude them solely because they have this higher risk factor. So if I have an employee who has heart disease, for example, I can't tell that employee, you can no longer work because I'm afraid you'll get sick. It's similar to what the ADA says about people who have, for example, I don't know, let's say a terrible limp, or they have to use a crutch or whatever. I can't say you can't work on my factory floor because you're at higher risk of slipping and falling than people who have two good legs. I use that term loosely, but my fear that somebody might get hurt isn't a justification for telling them they can't work. And the same thing is true with regard to somebody who is more at risk. I can't just make a unilateral decision that I'm not letting you come to work. I have to go through this interactive process that you're familiar with in the ADA, even though they're not ADA disabled in some cases. But in this case, we're talking about people who actually have disabilities. So I have to go through that interactive process to see if there's some way that I can let them come to work. Maybe I put them on a different shift. Maybe I make them work in a remote area. Maybe I give them additional PPE. Maybe I put up a plastic barrier around their desk. Maybe I give them more leave. Maybe I can find a way for them to work from home. The list of potential accommodations is endless, but you have to think about it. You can't just tell them you can't come to work anymore. Let's see. I think I just said this, so I'm ahead of myself. Okay. Oh, no, I didn't just say this. This one is different. This was talking about older folks as opposed to disabled folks. But the answer is the same. I can't tell somebody to stay home just because they're 65 or older, or any particular age or older, because I'm afraid something might happen to them. So, if they can work from home, that's great. But if they can't, I still have to make an effort to find a way to enable them to continue working either on site or off site. And I can't just say you're too old to work here while COVID-19 is raging. All right. What if an employee says he has a medical condition and can't work even from home because of the condition? Well, this is basically the ADA interactive process. You got to talk to them, find out what the condition is, and whether you can reasonably accommodate it. If it's not an ADA disability, they're not entitled to an accommodation under the ADA. They might be entitled to leave under the FMLA. If they can't work, the doctor says they can't work, whether it's COVID related or not, really, and they're not entitled to some sort of leave under the EPSLA or the EFMLA, then they might be entitled to leave nonetheless under the FMLA. Remember, EFMLA only applies to childcare. FMLA could apply to the person's own serious health condition. So if they've got a serious health condition and the only way to be safe is to stay home, not work, and they get a doctor to certify that they need it, well, then you would have to allow them to stay home and not work under the FMLA. If they've run out of all their leave and the ADA doesn't apply, well, at that point, your obligations are ended. Now, you may have some additional obligations under your own policies, and you have to be sure that you do that consistently, but the statutory leave maybe is out of the picture at that point. Should employees work from home? It depends. Right now, under the general order, you have to work from home if you can work from home. So it's not a question of whether I want my employees to stay home or whether I want them to come to work. If they can work from home, they have to. And a lot of employers don't understand that. So you've got to look at whether they can perform most or all of their work from home. And if they can, you need to make them do it. But if they're going to do it, you have to look at what are the factors to make sure they can do it effectively. So if somebody has to interact with people on the job all the time, let's say they're a supervisor, well, they can't work from home. There's no way to do it. Is there technology cost up front? Do I have to buy everybody a laptop? Do I have to buy huge, internet infrastructure, security policies, et cetera, in order to make this work? Well, if I've got 30, 40, even 100 employees and I could make them all work from home, but it's going to cost me millions of dollars. Well, then maybe I'm just going to lay some of those people off for right now instead of having them work from home. I would also look at how is this going to impact you in the future? If you demonstrate that people can work from home right now and COVID-19 goes away, how are you going to be affected if people want work from home options for an ADA reason in the future? You have to think about that and distinguish what you're doing now from what you might be required to do later. So if they're doing 90% of their work from home now, but not all of their essential functions, document that so that you don't get pigeonholed into it in the future. Your remote work policy should at least explain what the minimum work hours are. They should have a schedule. They should have scheduled meal breaks and rest periods, just like if they were working in the office, and that's if they're hourly. They should have a dedicated workspace, and I laugh, and Todd will understand why, because my dedicated workspace here at home frequently has cats walk across the front of it in the middle of a presentation. You haven't suffered that yet, but it could happen. They have to document their work hours, obviously, and they have to ask you for permission to work overtime or outside of the regular hours. Those are basic things. You do those things if they were working in the office, so you have to do it here too. I'll see. I don't think we need to do that one, and I'm getting pressed for time. I don't think we need to do that one either. All right, Todd, this is you, I believe.
Go ahead, Todd.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so what if you're asking an employee to return to work, but they don't want to, and it's purely out of fear? They don't have a medical issue. They're under the age of 65. Can you require that individual to return, or can you fire them if they don't want to? And generally speaking, if there's not a protected reason, their age or underlying health condition or childcare, like George was just talking about, then the employee has no legal reason for you to accommodate his or her time away, and they don't really have any protections. Then you just kind of have to, like George was saying, you have to think about, how much do I need this person to return? If I'm going to make an exception for them, I'm going to have to be consistent in making that exception for others. I want to make sure I'm not discriminating based on other protected characteristics like race and sex and that kind of thing. But generally speaking, if you're going to treat everybody the same, that person wouldn't have any protections. Let's go on to the next one, George. So if there's no remote work available, this is kind of just continue on here. These are other accommodations you might be able to offer the employee who's just fearful but doesn't have any protections. If remote work, if you don't have remote work, you try to change the workplace. I think George really hit a lot of this, having barriers, a more remote part of the workplace, a reduced salary, and you just want to make sure you're treating everyone the same. So let's go on to the next one. We're going to go through some return to work scenarios. This is an employee who has tested positive or been exposed. So your employee, in this case, a critical infrastructure worker, was exposed to the coronavirus but has no symptoms and has not been tested. Can he return to work? Under the current CDC guidelines, the federal CDC guidelines, they can return to work, but for 14 days, they must wear a mask 100% of the time. They must check their temperature immediately prior to the beginning of the shift. They have to remain 6 feet away from everyone else as much as possible. And the employer must clean and disinfect their workplace on a regular schedule. And the employee must self-monitor for symptoms and follow all the general guidelines. If they start experiencing any symptoms, they have to go home. Now, the Kentucky Department of Health, Dr. Stack, who you've probably seen on the news briefs with Governor Beshear, they've changed that a little bit to say that they want employees to, even if they're an essential worker, to stay home. It's a recommendation. So now you've got to balance Kentucky recommendation and the CDC recommendation. I don't have a great legal answer for you other than I think you get to pick which recommendation you want to follow since they are just recommendations. The only thing I would think more about is even if they technically are a critical infrastructure employee, is how much do you need that employee to be there? If you truly need them to be there, I think, document somewhere you're following the CDC guidelines. If you truly don't need them to be there, then maybe you fall back on and use the Kentucky guideline as a reason for not doing that. And I think basically this is unplowed ground here. Nobody really knows how that's going to turn out. Neither one of them are orders. They are both recommendations. Let's go on to the next slide, George. Okay, if your employee who is not a critical infrastructure worker was exposed to coronavirus but has no symptoms and has not been tested, can he return to work? That employee can return after 14 days with no symptoms, must follow the general CDC guidelines. A negative test during that period doesn't change that because that 14 days is the incubation period. That can be a little bit different for a healthcare employer. I think they can get it down to 10 days as long as there's still no symptoms. The one thing I will tell you about all of these recommendations from the CDC, I think George has said this earlier, these things change on a frequent basis. They've slowed down a little bit there, from March through June, it seemed like they changed every other day. So I would, bookmark the CDC page on your computer and check that frequently. You can, subscribe to the Fisher and Phillips website updates and alerts. We try to stay on top of this and send out alerts when we see those. But for this scenario, as of right now, he's not a critical infrastructure worker, and he's been exposed with no symptoms, no positive tests. He's still supposed to stay out for 14 days. All right, George, let's go on to the next one.
Let me toss one thing in there, Todd. The firm published a chart that guides employers through all these different return to work scenarios on August 13th. So you can probably find that on our website. And if you can't, you can email Todd or me and we'll find it for you.
Thanks, George. All right, so the next one is your employee has mild to moderate symptoms after being exposed to coronavirus. Can he return to work? Does it matter whether he's a critical infrastructure employee? He has to stay out the 14 days that have passed from the date of the last exposure. Then at least 24 hours have passed since the resolution of the fever without medication and all other symptoms have improved. You have to follow all the other general guidelines from the CDC. Whether or not the person is critical infrastructure doesn't matter. If they're having symptoms, this is going to apply to everybody, even a critical infrastructure employee. All right, let's talk a little bit about litigation, some stuff to look forward to. Not really, but we have this tracker on our webpage. You can go to and find this. We're tracking this across the country. What cases are being filed that relate to COVID-19. This chart, I think, for purposes of this presentation, was updated at the end of September, so it's a little bit dated. But as of that time, there were 23 complaints that have been filed in civil courts in Kentucky. 8 of those were based on discrimination. 5 were based on remote work and leave. 4 were retaliation whistleblowers, and 6 were wrongful discharge. So we kind of have the breakdown of that there. That doesn't really tell you anything more, I think, other than somebody was really excited about making a pie chart. Let's go on to the next one, George. So I've got a couple of examples of some lawsuits, and I'm looking off to the side here because I have a screen that's a little bit larger that my old eyes can see a little better than this laptop. We had this Hernandez v. First Frontier Insurance. This was filed at Fayette Circuit Court. And looks like our screen has, there we go back. Here, the plaintiff alleges he was wrongfully terminated in violation of public policy for refusing to get retested while he was on the mandatory quarantine after testing positive for COVID-19. Plaintiff essentially claims that this employer was trying to force him to prematurely return to work and to violate applicable quarantine orders. I think this demonstrates where the plaintiff lawyers intend to rely on those public health or governor's executive orders to support a public policy wrongful discharge claim. That really hasn't been determined yet in Kentucky courts. In Kentucky, for it to be a public wrongful termination violation of public policy, it has to be based either on the Kentucky Constitution or a statute or a regulation. I don't know that there's a case out there that says or executive order. So that's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out, what the judges think. And my guess is that might go all the way up to the Kentucky Supreme Court to get decided. It also underscores the importance of documentation. That's likely going to be key in this case is when did the person get exposed? When did they test positive? When were they having symptoms? So that you can fit that under the CDC or the state of Kentucky guidelines for when that person could return to work. As we said earlier, if they've been exposed and they're not having symptoms and you're waiting that 14-day period, getting a test won't necessarily bring them back to work sooner. Like I said, a little different for healthcare employers, but generally for a non-healthcare employer, it's not going to. Okay, let's go on to the next one. We got Coppet v. Beechwood Commons Assisted Living. This is from Ohio. This gives you an example of cases filed. Plaintiff alleged she was wrongfully terminated in violation of public policy after criticizing her employer's response to COVID-19. Alleges she asked to work remotely because her husband is immunocompromised and in the category of heightened morbidity and mortality risk. Now, this is an example of a creative lawsuit. The employee was not protected by any particular law, but essentially claims it was unlawful as a matter of public policy to fire her for complaining about her employer's COVID-19 response and for putting her husband at risk by making her work without special precautions. In Kentucky, I would not expect that to last very long unless the courts decide the executive orders are going to work. That might have been a better case for them to bring under Kentucky OSHA as a retaliation whistleblower claim, but even that wouldn't support a private cause of action in court. Let's go on to the next one, George. This was in the Northern District of Indiana. Plaintiff sued under the FMLA, the FFCRA, alleged she notified her employer she needed leave after